Okay, let's do another one. So again, this is degree 3. Which tells us we should have 3 answers. Okay, so we're going to start with this negative 20. So things that multiply together get 20 are 1 and 20, 2 and 10. 3 doesn't work, but we have 4 and 5. So I just go down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 until I know that I have all of them. I know I can stop when I get a number that's written in the second column. So I have 1, 2, 4, 5, 10, and 20. On the bottom, there's a 1 in front, so there's just 1. So my possibilities here are 1 and negative 1, 2 and negative 2, 4 and negative 4, 5 and negative 5, 10 and negative 10, 20 and negative 20. So I'm going to look at a graph to see which one of that long list that I really want to start with. So in my calculator, I would type x to the power of 3 plus 8x squared plus 11x minus 20. And then hit graph. And on my calculator, it looks like I've got something like this. Okay, and I can't actually see this bottom part. It doesn't really matter. It looks like it crosses here, here, and here. That looks like negative 5. This one looks like negative 4. And this one looks like 1. And those are all in our list. So we just choose one that we want to start with. So I say, okay, I think maybe I'll choose 1 just because it's positive and maybe easier. So I'm going to start with x equals 1. I'm going to do synthetic division, so let me get my problem written down. Okay, so now I'm ready to start. I thought my answer was x equals 1, so I'm going to put that out here. And then I'm going to do synthetic division. Each of these terms is here, x to the third, x to the second, x, and a number. So I don't need to add anything because there's nothing missing. There's a 1 in front of that, so I'll have 1, 8, 11, and negative 20. So remember the first step is just to bring down that first number. 1 times 1 is 1. 8 plus 1 is 9. 9 times 1 is 9. 11 plus 9 is 20. 20 times 1 is 20. And negative 20 plus 20 is 0. And this is my remainder. And because it's 0, it means that I do have an answer of x equals 1. It also means I have a new problem from this right here. So I'll rewrite that starting with x squared, because that's 1 degree smaller than I started with. X squared plus 9x plus 20. I'm going to make it equal 0. So I'm going to write that in my step 4. Now this is a degree 2, so it tells me to go on to step 5. And I want to solve this now, factoring if I can, if not quadratic formula. But I can see that this one can be factored actually. 4 times 5 is 20, and 4 plus 5 is 9. So I'll have x plus 4, x plus 5 equals 0. We'll split them apart. X plus 4 equals 0. Subtract 4 from both sides. Gives me x equals negative 4. Here I'll write x plus 5 equals 0. Subtract 5 from both sides. And that gives me x equals -5. And I have my answer from earlier of x equals 1. Notice those are the same things, 3 things we thought from the graph at the very beginning, and we did indeed get those same 3 answers, which means you could have started with any one of those numbers in your first synthetic division. So let's look at one more of these before we do something slightly different. Notice that this one this time is degree 4. Okay, so we're going to have 4 answers. So we'll start again with possible rational zeros. So this 13 we start with, and that can only be 1 and 13, so that's what we'll have on top. And then there's a 1 in front of the very beginning, so we'll have a 1 on the bottom, because it's just 1 times 1. Notice the directions here say solve. That's a little bit different than the directions on the earlier examples. But whether we're finding zeros or whether we're solving, it's really asking us to do the same thing. So we'll list our possibilities here. It could be 1 or -1. And 13 over 1 is 13, so it could be 13 or -13. So we'll graph this in our calculator. X to the 4th minus 6x to the 3rd plus 22x to the 2nd minus 30x plus 13. When you put it into your calculator, you don't write in the equal 0. Okay, the equal 0 is the part that tells us we're going to look at the x-axis. So we'll graph it. It's taking my calculator a minute to graph that. So when we graph it, the only thing I see is it kind of comes down and hits that, looks like maybe 1, and then goes back up. So we're going to have to start with x equals 1 because it's the only thing that even looks like it might be a possibility. So we're going to write x equals 1 here. Give me a minute to get this written down up here again so that I can see it. Okay, so notice that we have an x to the 4th, an x to the 3rd, an x to the 2nd, an x to the 1st, and then no x at all. So every exponent is there, which means that we can just write our numbers in our synthetic division. So we'll have 1, -6, 22, -30, and 13. We'll just bring this first number straight down. 1 times 1 is 1. -6 plus 1 is -5. -5 times 1 is -5. 22 minus 5, or 22 plus a -5 is 17. 17 times 1 is 17. -30 plus 17 is -13. -13 times 1 is -13. And 13 plus a -13 is 0. And this is our remainder, and because that's our remainder, we know, because it's a 0, that x equals 1 is an answer. And then my new problem, because this started with an x to the 4th up here originally, my new problem would start with an x to the 3rd, minus 5x squared plus 17x minus 13. We're going to make it equal 0 so we can solve it. So that's the problem we're going to write on step 4. Now, because this is not an x squared at the beginning, we have to go through and do that process again with this problem. We have one answer, we need 4, but this is going to help us get another one. So again, we start with this n number. The only things that multiply together to get 13 are 1 and 13. So that's what's going to go on our top. The number in front of here is 1. The only things that multiply together to get that number is 1 and 1, so we'll put 1 here. And then we'll list our possibilities. 1 over 1 is 1 and -1. 13 over 1 is 13 and -13. So then we're going to graph this in our graphing calculators. So I'll clear that out. the one that was in there before, so I'll have x to the third minus 5x squared plus 17x minus 13. And I'll hit graph. And this time it just looks kind of like almost like a straight line going up through 1. It's not really a straight line, but the important thing is it looks like it crosses at 1, so it looks like we probably have 1 as an answer. So I'm going to do synthetic division with 1. I'm going to use the numbers that are in front here. Again, they're all there. We have an x to the third, and then an x to the second, and then an x, and then nothing. So I'll have 1, negative 5, 17, and negative 13. So I'll bring down this 1. 1 times 1 is 1. Negative 5 plus 1 is negative 4. Negative 4 times 1 is negative 4. 17 plus a negative 4 is positive 13. 13 times 1 is 13. And negative 13 plus 13 is 0. So because this is a 0, it tells us that we have another answer of x equals 1. And this also now gives us a new problem. X squared minus 4x plus 13 equals 0. So this is now an x squared equation, which means that now we can move on to step 5. We can't go to step 5 until we have an x squared equation. So we'll write that minus 4x plus 13 as our new problem here. Now this I don't think can be factored because the only thing that multiplies together to get 13 is 1 and 13, and those do not add to get negative 4. So we'll have to use the quadratic formula. That means that a is 1, b is negative 4, and c is 13. So x is equal to the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. So b is negative 4. Then we'd have negative 4 again in the next parentheses, 1 in the next parenthesis, 13 in that last one on top, and 2 times 1 on the bottom. So we're going to do this in groups. This first one tells me that I get x equals, let me do it over here, x equals 4 plus or minus the square root. And I'm going to do this part, the part that's underneath, all at once. And I get negative 36 in here. And then on the bottom, when I do this piece, I just get 2. So let's simplify that. Square root of negative 36, remember the square root of 36 is 6. But the negative underneath here becomes an I over 2. And then we would need to write that with each piece being divided by 2. And that gives me 2 answers, 2 plus 3i and x equals 2 minus 3i. So there's one answer. Those are complex answers. And then we had x equals 1. We had x equals 1 again. We wouldn't write it more than one time, but it is there twice. It's a repeated answer. It's also why the very first graph at 1, it came down and touched the graph and went back up. These complex numbers don't show up on a graph. That's why we can't see any other x-intercepts. Okay, we're going to switch gears just a little bit. This goes the other direction. This is how we can write a polynomial if we're given the factors. So the first thing is that we write each 0 we're given as x equals that number. The degree tells us how many x values we should have. You have to remember that complex numbers always come in pairs. Then you're going to move the number onto the same side as x so that each equals 0. You'll put parentheses around these because those are our factors. We'll multiply them together, and then we'll use the given information to find a. So here we go. It says find a third-degree polynomial function with real coefficients that has -3 and I as zeros. So it tells us that x equals -3 and x equals I. That's what zeros means, that x equals this and x equals this. But this tells me that I should have 3 of them and I only have 2 of them. And that's where I need to remember that if we have i's, that they have to come in pairs. So if I have a positive I, that means I also have to have a negative I. Whether or not they tell you that, they always come in pairs. So now we're going to move this over to this side by adding 3. So that I get x plus 3 equals 0. I'm going to move the I over by subtracting it, so I get x minus I equals 0. And here I'll add the I, so I get x plus I equals 0. So this is a factor, this is a factor, and this is a factor. So I can write them all together. X plus 3, x minus I, x plus I, all equals 0. Okay, now I'm going to multiply these together. And I think it's easier if we start with the I pieces first, this right here. So I'm going to start with x times x is x squared. X times I is xi. Negative I times x is negative, I'm going to write x first, negative xi. And then negative I times positive I is negative I squared. So that's still in parentheses, and we still have x plus 3 out here in front. So let's do some simplifying. Here, that cancels out because it's positive xi and minus xi. Here, I squared is the same thing as -1. So we have negative 1. So that tells me that this is really x squared plus 1 and x plus 3. So now we need to multiply those together. Still equals 0. So let me get us some more space and then we'll keep going. Okay, now we need to multiply these together. So I'll start with x times x squared is x cubed. X times 1 is x. 3 times x squared is 3x squared. And then 3 times 1 is 3. So let's put that in the right order. We would have x cubed plus 3x squared plus x plus 3. And this is almost our functions. Let me leave off that equals for a second. So the situation is that this could all still be multiplied by some number which we like to call a. Okay, and once we find out what that a is, then we'll have our f of x. That's what this information right here is for. This information tells us that at the end we need to make x equal 1 and y, or f of x, equal 8. So in this problem, I don't know what a is. I keep that a here. But I'm going to make x be 1 to the third plus 3 times 1 squared plus 1 plus 3. And this is my y, or my f of x, right here. So that has to equal 8. So that's what this is telling me right here. So then I simplify it because this is going to help me find a. So this would be 1 cubed. You can type that into your calculator all at once, just like you see it. 1 to the power of 3 plus 3 times 1 squared plus 1 plus 3. So this tells me that A times 8 is equal to 8. I divide both sides by 8, and that tells me that A is equal to 1. So now I can write my final answer if I know that A is 1. I go back to here, and I just make A equal 1. Let me erase that so I have room to write it. So now I know that f of x is equal to 1 times x cubed plus 3x squared plus x plus 3. I want to go ahead and multiply that, but when you multiply by 1, you just get this as my final answer.